No, I haven't spoken to her today. Maybe she's just out running errands or went for a walk or something. I'm sure she'll be back soon. But hours continued to pass, and there was still no sign of Skylar. She wasn't answering her phone, none of her friends had seen her, and her social media accounts had gone quiet, something completely out of character for her. Eventually, Mary and Dave reported their daughter missing to the police. At first, police treated it as a teenage runaway case. They noted that Skylar had apparently snuck out of her bedroom window during the night, since a small bench had been pushed under the window and the screen was removed. There were also grainy surveillance camera images from a nearby apartment complex showing Skylar getting into a car around 12:30 a.m. Despite what it looked like, Skylar's parents insisted she would never just run away. She hadn't taken any belongings with her, and she hadn't said anything to suggest she wanted to leave. It wasn't long before police learned that the car Skylar had gotten into belonged to Sheila Eddy, the same best friend Dave had called the day Skylar went missing. Sheila admitted that she and another close friend of Skylar's, Rachel Schoaf, had picked her up late that night to go driving around. According to Sheila, they just hung out for a while and then dropped Skylar off at the end of her street an hour later. But there was no sign Skylar had returned home. Police started to suspect something wasn't right. Weeks turned into months, and there was still no sign of Skylar. The public became heavily involved, with people sharing Skylar's missing poster all over social media. Her family never stopped searching. Then, in January 2013, 6 months after Skylar vanished, Rachel Schoaf suddenly had a breakdown. She confessed to her parents and then to the police. She and Sheila had murdered Skylar. Rachel revealed that the two girls had planned Skylar's murder in advance. They had prepared knives and cleaning supplies and hidden them in the car. On the night of July 5th, they convinced Skylar to sneak out with them, telling her they wanted to hang out like old times. They drove her out to a remote wooded area just across the state line into Pennsylvania. Once there, the three girls got out of the car and began walking on a trail. At one point, Rachel and Sheila stood behind Skylar, counted to 3, and then began stabbing her repeatedly. Skylar tried to run but didn't make it far. She was eventually subdued and killed. Afterward, the girls tried to bury her with dirt and branches, then cleaned themselves up and returned home as if nothing had happened. Rachel led investigators to Skylar's remains in a wooded area off a lonely road, just as she had described. DNA testing confirmed it was Skylar. When asked why they had done it, Rachel gave a chilling and senseless answer. "We just didn't like her anymore." The confession shocked everyone, especially Skylar's parents, who had welcomed both girls into their home numerous times. Sheila maintained her innocence for months until she was finally arrested and charged. In court, Rachel and Sheila both pleaded guilty to second-degree and first-degree murder respectively and were sentenced to lengthy prison terms. The entire case devastated the small town of Morgantown. Skylar had been betrayed and killed by the very people she trusted most. Her parents have since worked to pass Skylar's Law in West Virginia, which ensures that all missing children are treated as abducted immediately, no matter the circumstances. What started as a seemingly ordinary teenage friendship unraveled into a brutal, calculated murder, one that shocked the entire nation. Out and go for a joyride, something the girls had done many times before. Skylar was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed. She quietly slipped out her bedroom window, using the bench to lower herself to the ground. Then she made her way down the street where she met up with Sheila and Rachel, who had parked nearby. The three girls drove across state lines into Pennsylvania, eventually pulling into a remote wooded area where they had gone before. But this time, it wasn't a harmless joyride. As the girls stepped out of the car, Rachel and Sheila told Skylar they were going to smoke, and they all began walking down a trail. At a certain point, Rachel and Sheila stepped behind Skylar and, on the count of 3, began stabbing her. Skylar tried to fight back and even managed to grab the knife at one point, but she was overwhelmed. She asked them, in her final moments, "Why?" And according to Rachel, the only answer they gave was, "Because we didn't like you anymore." Once Skylar was dead, they tried to bury her under branches and leaves. They had brought cleaning supplies, a shovel, and spare clothes, planning it all out in advance. But they couldn't dig deep into the rocky soil, so they just tried to cover her body as best they could before fleeing the scene. When Rachel finished her confession, the police were stunned and horrified, but they also finally had answers. Rachel agreed to lead authorities to the spot where they had left Skylar's body. It was a remote area just off a rural road, and sure enough, they found remains. DNA testing confirmed it was Skylar. With the discovery of the body and Rachel's full confession, police moved in on Sheila. For months, Sheila had played the role of the concerned friend. She tweeted heartfelt messages about missing Skylar. She even helped search for her, walking side by side with Skylar's grieving parents. But now her facade was up. When confronted, Sheila showed little remorse. In fact, her social media activity around the time of Skylar's disappearance had been shockingly cold and even cryptic, including tweets like, "Always keep your cool," and "We really did go on 3." In 2013, both Rachel Schoaf and Sheila Eddy were arrested and charged with Skylar's murder. Rachel pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Sheila ultimately pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Rachel was sentenced to 30 years with eligibility for parole after 10. When Rachel finished her confession, the police were stunned and horrified, but they also finally had answers. Rachel agreed to lead authorities to the spot where they had left Skylar's body. It was a remote area just off a rural road, and sure enough, they found remains. DNA testing confirmed it was Skylar. With the discovery of the body and Rachel's full confession, police moved in on Sheila. For months, Sheila had played the role of the concerned friend. She tweeted heartfelt messages about missing Skylar. She even helped search for her, walking side by side with Skylar's grieving parents. But now her facade was up. When confronted, Sheila showed little remorse. In fact, her social media activity around the time of Skylar's disappearance had been shockingly cold and even cryptic, including tweets like, "Always keep your cool," and "We really did go on 3." In 2013, both Rachel Schoaf and Sheila Eddy were arrested and charged with Skylar's murder. Rachel pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Sheila ultimately pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Rachel was sentenced to 30 years with eligibility for parole after 10. On the night of July 5th, after finishing her shift at Wendy's, Skylar came home, told her parents she loved them, and went to bed. But sometime after midnight, she received texts from Rachel and Sheila inviting her out to smoke marijuana. Though reluctant due to recent tensions, she eventually agreed. She quietly opened her bedroom window, removed the screen, placed it in her closet, climbed out, and left the bench below her window as a makeshift step for when she returned. At 12:30 a.m., a car pulled up in front of her apartment. It was Sheila's, with Rachel in the front seat. Skylar got in the back, and they drove away. The three headed towards a remote spot just over the Pennsylvania border, somewhere they'd been before to smoke. Once they arrived, they walked to a clearing off an old road and sat down. Sheila, realizing she didn't have a lighter, asked Skylar to go back to the car and get one.